The moment your absence begins. Your absence doesn't feel loud at first, and that's the trick. To the narcissist, it initially registers as silence, not loss, like a radio that suddenly stops picking up a familiar signal. Their brain is wired for external regulation, meaning they do not generate emotional stability internally the way a healthy person does. You were not just a partner, friend, or source of affection. You were a stabilizing neurological input. When you disappear, the narcissist's nervous system loses a primary regulator, and the brain responds the way it does to withdrawal. Cortisol rises, dopamine crashes, and their sense of self begins to wobble. They may look calm, confident, even relieved, but internally the system is scrambling to rebalance. This is not sadness yet. This is disorientation. The collapse does not start with tears. It starts with confusion. And confusion is deadly to a personality built on control. The narcissist's confidence after the discard is not real confidence. It is adrenaline. Neuroscience shows that when a narcissist discards someone, the brain briefly floods with dopamine and norepinephrine, the same chemicals released during risk-taking and dominance behavior. This is why they seem energized, social, flirtatious, and strangely productive right after leaving you. They mistake this chemical spike for proof they were right. But adrenaline is not sustainable fuel. It burns hot and fast. Without a consistent source of admiration, mirroring, or emotional labor, the dopamine loop collapses. What replaces it is irritability, mental fog, and an unnameable sense of emptiness they cannot explain. They will call it boredom, restlessness, or needing something new. In reality, their brain is beginning to panic. The show must go on, but backstage the walls are already cracking. Here is the part they never understand until it's too late. Your absence removes friction. When you were present, you absorbed their projections, regulated their moods, and gave them something to push against. Without you, there is no counterweight. Their thoughts spiral because no one is stabilizing the narrative anymore. Studies on narcissistic traits show that when external validation drops, rumination increases dramatically. They replay conversations, rewrite history, and stalk memory the way they once stalked your attention. This is not nostalgia. This is the brain searching for a lost regulator. The mind becomes noisy, repetitive, and compulsive. Sleep quality drops. Focus fragments. Chaos begins quietly, internally, long before it shows up in their relationships. This is where the illusion of moving on starts to fail. New people do not land the same way you did, and the narcissist feels this immediately, even if they refuse to admit it. The brain compares sources of supply automatically, measuring intensity, familiarity, and responsiveness. You were predictable in your care, consistent in your attention, and deep in your emotional engagement. New supply feels flat by comparison, not worse, just thinner. This creates irritation the narcissist cannot place, so they externalize it. They criticize, devalue, or emotionally test the new person harder and faster. What looks like confidence is actually impatience. What looks like happiness is actually dissatisfaction wearing a smile. Behind closed doors, the narcissist begins to fracture their own story. Publicly, they present certainty. Privately, they experience doubt they cannot tolerate. This is where secrecy increases. Hidden searches, late-night scrolling, revisiting, old messages, checking your social media, and pretending they don't care. The brain is trying to reattach to a familiar emotional pattern, even while the ego denies the loss. This internal split is exhausting. Neuroscience calls this cognitive dissonance. Trauma psychology calls it identity destabilization. The harder they pretend not to feel it, the more psychological energy it costs. Suppression does not heal. It compounds. Every avoided emotion accrues interest. Before we go any further, pause right here. If this is already clicking for you, do two things for the channel: subscribe and drop a comment saying absence is power. Not for me, for the algorithm, and for the next person who needs to hear this at 2 a.m. We're going deep, and this series is built to last when control evaporates and chaos moves in. Once your absence settles in, the narcissist's sense of control begins to decay, not explode. Control for them was never internal discipline, It was environmental management. They controlled moods by controlling people, outcomes by controlling narratives, and anxiety by controlling you. Without you in the system, their usual levers stop working. The brain hates unpredictability, and narcissistic brains are especially intolerant of it. Functional MRI studies show heightened activity in the anterior cingulate cortex when narcissists lose perceived control, which translates to agitation, impulsivity, and poor decision-making. This is why their life starts to look messy all at once. Missed deadlines, broken routines, half-finished plans, and sudden reinventions pile up. Chaos is not accidental here, it is neurological. Their mind is scrambling to reassert dominance over a system that no longer responds. Relationships are the first casualty. Without your stabilizing presence, every interaction becomes transactional and brittle. New partners, friends, or admirers are unconsciously pressured to replace the regulation you once provided, and that is an impossible job. They are expected to admire more, soothe faster, and tolerate instability without context. This creates accelerated intimacy followed by rapid disappointment. The narcissist becomes easily bored, easily offended, and strangely dissatisfied even when they're being praised. Research on narcissistic attachment patterns shows a sharp drop in relational satisfaction once novelty wears off, especially when the previous attachment was deep and emotionally rich. You set a neurological benchmark they didn't realize they were setting. No one else hits it. And instead of grieving that loss, they blame the room. Focus is next to go. The narcissist's attention used to orbit around managing you, reacting to you, or extracting emotional energy from you. That activity gave their days structure. Without it, time stretches uncomfortably, and the mind fills the silence with intrusive thought loops. They start projects they don't finish, chase goals that don't satisfy them, and scroll endlessly looking for something that clicks. Executive function drops because emotional dysregulation hijacks cognitive resources. This isn't laziness, it's overload. Their brain is burning energy, suppressing feelings, instead of directing effort outward. Ironically, the harder they try to look unbothered, the less capable they become. Confidence erodes quietly when competence declines. This is also where comparison begins, whether they admit it or not. The narcissist's brain constantly ranks sources of supply, and your absence forces a recalibration. You become the reference point, the standard against which others are measured. This is how the Golden X is formed, not through idealization, but through contrast. You were there during moments of vulnerability, routine, and real life, not just highlights. That depth imprints. Over time, memory edits itself, trimming conflict and magnifying consistency. This isn't romance, it's neuroeconomics. The brain remembers what regulated it best, and that memory does not expire. What they show the world during this phase is performance. Smiles get bigger, captions get louder, plans get grander. But internally, stress chemistry is running unchecked. Chronic cortisol elevation leads to irritability, sleep disruption, and emotional numbness. They may drink more, work more, or distract themselves with novelty, mistaking stimulation for healing. The mask gets heavier because the gap between appearance and reality widens. This is the paradox. Hiding the hurt intensifies it. Suppression keeps the nervous system locked in fight or flight. Over time, this erodes resilience, making future stressors hit harder. The collapse doesn't look dramatic yet, but it's compounding. There's a darkly funny truth here, if you can see it from a distance. In trying so hard to prove they didn't need you, they structure their entire life around avoiding the feeling of losing you. That avoidance becomes the organizing principle. Everything becomes louder, faster, and emptier at the same time. You, meanwhile, are not doing anything at all, and that's the point. Your absence is not an action, it's a removal. And removals reveal structures more honestly than additions ever could. What? They do in secret when you're gone. In private, the narcissist's world sounds nothing like the story they sell. When the audience disappears, so does the script. Their brain, no longer fed by steady external validation, turns inward, and that is not a safe place for them. Narcissistic structures are designed to avoid self-reflection, not survive it. Without you present to absorb their projections, those projections ricochet back. Thoughts loop. Memories resurface out of order. Emotions arrive without names. This is why nights become harder than days. The nervous system quiets, distractions fade, and the unresolved rises. One of the most consistent secret behaviors is monitoring. Not always obvious stalking, but quiet checking. Curiosity masked as indifference. Just wondering dressed up as coincidence. Neuroscience explains this as reward prediction error. The brain expects a familiar emotional payoff and doesn't receive it, so it keeps checking to see if the pattern has resumed. Your image, your name, your energy become symbolic stand-ins for regulation. They may not want you back in reality, but the brain wants the feeling you provided. This is why even years later, a narcissist can feel triggered by your happiness or neutrality. Indifference is especially destabilizing. It offers no emotional data for the brain to work with. In secret, they also rehearse conversations that never happen. Arguments they win, apologies they imagine giving, confrontations where they reclaim superiority. This is not closure-seeking, it's control rehearsal. Studies on narcissistic rumination show a strong link between imagined dialogue and ego repair attempts. They are trying to reassert dominance in a scenario where they lost access. But imaginary victories don't soothe the nervous system. They leave the body unsatisfied, like chewing gum when you needed a meal. The more they do this, the more frustrated they become. The brain knows the difference between fantasy and regulation. Shame also begins to leak through, and this is critical. Narcissists do not experience shame the way healthy people do. It's more fragmented, more somatic, more threatening. Your absence creates space for self-comparison, and that comparison does not go well. They notice patterns repeating, the same conflicts, the same endings, the same sense of emptiness. But instead of insight, the reaction is often defensiveness or collapse into self-pity. This is when they rewrite history most aggressively. You may be villainized not because you were harmful, but because you were stabilizing, and losing that stings. The brain protects itself by distorting the narrative. Physiologically, the cost accumulates. Chronic stress without emotional release leads to tension, headaches, digestive issues, and fatigue. Sleep becomes shallow or erratic. They may wake up with a sense of dread they can't place. This is the body processing what the mind refuses to name. The longer they hide the hurt, the more it embeds itself in the nervous system. Suppressed emotion does not disappear, it migrates. Over time, this leads to burnout, irritability, and a brittle emotional state. They are less flexible, less charming, and less resilient than they used to be. Here's the part that matters for your healing. None of this requires your involvement. The collapse deepens because you stay gone. Every attempt they make to bypass grief, accountability, or self-reflection delays healing and magnifies damage. You are not punishing them. You are simply not rescuing them anymore. And without a rescuer, the internal structure has to stand on its own. For a narcissist, that structure was never fully built. If this section is landing, pause again and help the channel grow. Subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment that says the mask comes off in private. That engagement tells the platform this isn't noise, it's medicine. How? You become the golden X for life. The concept of the golden X is often misunderstood as romantic longing, but that's not what this is. For the narcissist, it's neurological imprinting. Your role in their life coincided with a period where their nervous system felt regulated. Their identity felt reinforced, and their emotional needs were met with consistency. The brain does not forget sources of effective regulation easily. Even when they intellectually devalue you, the body remembers the stability. This creates a split. The mind denies, the nervous system recalls. That split never fully resolves. Over time, memory edits itself in predictable ways. Cognitive psychology shows that emotionally significant relationships are remembered with increasing idealization once they're no longer accessible. Conflict fades first. Emotional safety lingers. You become associated with before things went wrong, even if you were not the cause of what went wrong. This is why new relationships are often compared to you in silence. Not because you were perfect, but because you were known. Familiarity carries regulatory weight. The brain prefers known stability over unknown stimulation, especially under stress. As their confidence continues to erode, the narcissist begins to experience something close to grief, though they would never call it that. It shows up as irritability, bitterness, or a vague sense of loss they attribute to external factors. They may speak about the one that got away without naming you, or frame you as someone who changed or couldn't handle them. This is ego repair language. It protects against the deeper truth, that they lost access to a stabilizing presence they could not replace. And replacements are exactly what they keep trying. Here's where permanence comes in. Each failed relationship after you reinforces the imprint. Every time a new partner disappoints, your memory gains contrast and strength. This is a cumulative effect. The narcissist's brain learns through pattern recognition, and the pattern keeps pointing back to the same absence. You become a benchmark they cannot consciously admit they set. This is why hoovering attempts can resurface years later, often during moments of stress or life transition. The brain reaches for what once worked, not because of love, but because of conditioning. What they never show is the quiet resignation that follows. At some point, many narcissists stop trying to fully replace you and settle for surface-level connections instead. Depth becomes threatening. Intimacy reminds them of what they lost and cannot recreate. So they choose quantity over quality, stimulation over safety. This looks like moving on, but it's actually shrinking. The emotional range narrows. The world gets flatter. This is not healing. It's adaptation to loss without integration. And here's the Stoic truth that matters for you. This process does not require your awareness or participation. You do not need to be vindicated, acknowledged, or apologized to for this imprint to exist. The nervous system does not negotiate with ego. Your absence does the work, because it forces reality to remain unedited. The longer you stay gone, the more honest their internal reckoning becomes. Silence, in this context, is not passive, it is structural. Why? Hiding the hurt makes the collapse worse. For the narcissist, hiding pain is not a coping strategy, it is a core survival mechanism. From a neurological standpoint, admitting hurt threatens the false self, the constructed identity that exists to avoid shame. So instead of processing loss, they suppress it. Suppression, however, is metabolically expensive. Brain imaging studies show that emotional suppression increases activity in stress-related regions while decreasing integration in areas responsible for insight and regulation. In plain terms, it makes everything harder. The body stays tense, the mind stays busy, and nothing resolves. What they call strength is actually chronic strain. The more they hide the hurt, the more the nervous system compensates in unhealthy ways. They may overwork, overpost, overdrink, or overperform socially, chasing stimulation to drown out discomfort. These behaviors provide temporary relief but deepen long-term instability. Dopamine spikes followed by crashes create emotional whiplash. Over time, the baseline mood lowers. Irritability replaces charisma. Anxiety replaces confidence. They don't connect this decline to you or the loss, they blame age, stress, or people being disappointing. This externalization protects the ego but prevents healing. Avoidance keeps the wound open. Psychologically, this leads to what clinicians call masked depression. It doesn't look like sadness, it looks like cynicism, boredom, and emotional detachment. The narcissist becomes harder to please and quicker to discard, not because they are thriving, but because nothing reaches them the way it used to. Your absence looms here, not as longing but as contrast. You represent a time when emotional input actually registered. The more they pretend not to feel that loss, the more their emotional range collapses. Life becomes grayscale. They may insist they are fine, but fine is not fulfilled. There is also a cumulative cost to the mask itself. Maintaining a false self requires constant feedback from the environment, and without reliable sources, the structure weakens. Cracks appear in moments of stress, disproportionate anger, sudden withdrawal, or unexpected vulnerability quickly followed by defensiveness. This is the psyche glitching. The system is overloaded. Each unprocessed loss compounds the next, creating a backlog of unresolved emotion. By the time they feel it, it's no longer about you alone. It's about everything they never dealt with. And that weight is heavy. From a long-term perspective, this is why collapse is often delayed but severe. The narcissist doesn't fall apart immediately because suppression works, until it doesn't. When life inevitably applies pressure, aging, career setbacks, health issues, or relational losses, the internal structure lacks flexibility. There is no emotional reserve to draw from. What could have been processed gradually hits all at once. This is why later life, narcissistic collapses can be profound and disorienting. The mask held too long, and now it's fused to nothing. For your healing, this matters because it reframes the story. Your absence didn't cause their pain. It removed the buffer that prevented them from feeling it. You were not the source of their stability. You were the workaround. Once you're gone, reality resumes its job. And reality is relentless but fair. The longer they avoid it, the steeper the reckoning. Your silence is not cruelty. It is the natural boundary that allows truth to surface. Staying gone is not an emotional decision. It's a physiological one. When you remove yourself from a narcissistic dynamic, your nervous system begins to recalibrate in ways that are quiet but profound. At first, it feels unnatural, even wrong, because your body was conditioned to constant engagement, explanation, and repair. You were trained to respond, to soothe, to anticipate. Absence interrupts that conditioning. The brain slowly learns that silence is not danger. This is the beginning of real regulation. From a Stoic perspective, staying gone is an act of discipline, not indifference. You are choosing what you can control, your presence, your energy, your attention, and releasing what you cannot, their behavior, their perception, their collapse. Neuroscience backs this up. When you stop re-engaging, the stress response associated with them weakens through a process called extinction learning. Triggers lose potency. Emotional spikes flatten. What once hijacked your nervous system becomes background noise. This is not forgetting, it's integration. Meanwhile, your absence continues to exert pressure on their system without any effort on your part. This is the paradox that confuses people. Doing nothing is still doing something when your presence was the stabilizer. Every day you remain unavailable, their brain is forced to adapt without the shortcut you provided. They may attempt hoovering, indirect contact, or narrative manipulation, but these are last-ditch efforts to restore regulation, not signs of power. Each failed attempt reinforces the reality of loss. Time becomes your ally. You are no longer reacting, you are allowing entropy to do its work. Emotionally, staying gone gives you something they never develop, internal locus of control. You begin generating your own stability instead of outsourcing it. This shows up as clearer thinking, improved sleep, and a return of curiosity about your own life. Research on post-traumatic growth shows that individuals who disengage fully from abusive dynamics often experience increased self-efficacy and emotional resilience over time. You are not becoming harder, you are becoming sturdier. That difference matters. There's also a quiet reclaiming of identity that happens here. Without constant mirroring or distortion, you rediscover preferences, boundaries, and rhythms that were muted. Your energy stops leaking. Decisions feel cleaner. The chaos that followed them does not follow you. This contrast is important because it dismantles the myth that relationships are supposed to feel turbulent. Stability starts to feel normal again, and normal starts to feel good. Here's the understated win. You do not need to witness their collapse for it to be real. Stoicism teaches that outcomes exist independent of observation. Whether you ever hear about their struggles or not, the process unfolds. Your job is not to monitor it. Your job is to live. The more grounded you become, the less relevant their inner world feels. That indifference is not coldness, it's freedom. Long-term outcome, them versus you. Over the long term, the difference between your trajectory and theirs becomes impossible to ignore, even if it's never spoken. Healing is cumulative. So is avoidance. While you are slowly rebuilding internal regulation, they are repeatedly outsourcing theirs. This creates two diverging nervous systems moving in opposite directions. Yours grows more flexible and resilient. Theirs becomes more brittle and reactive. Time does not heal equally. It rewards honesty and punishes denial. Years out, the narcissist's life often looks busy but shallow. There may be movement, new jobs, new partners, new identities, but little depth. Each change is framed as growth, but the underlying patterns remain untouched. Research on untreated narcissistic traits shows remarkable consistency across decades. The same conflicts repeat with different people. The same dissatisfaction resurfaces after each new beginning. They are always starting over, not because they are adventurous, but because nothing lasts without internal stability. Your life, by contrast, begins to feel quieter and more grounded. That quiet can feel unfamiliar at first, especially if chaos once felt like connection. But over time, the nervous system learns to associate calm with safety rather than threat. Relationships become less intense and more sustainable. You stop confusing emotional labor with love. Decisions are guided by values instead of urgency. This is not dramatic progress, it's durable progress, the kind that holds under pressure. From their perspective, this divergence is unsettling. Even if they never reach out, they often sense the shift. You no longer orbit them emotionally, and that absence removes a reference point they relied on. The Golden X imprint doesn't fade with time, it becomes contextualized. You represent a fork in the road, a version of life that required accountability they avoided. That realization may surface as resentment, nostalgia, or dismissal. None of those emotions resolve the underlying truth. You moved forward. They stayed in place. One of the most ironic outcomes is that the more regulated you become, the less interested you are in proving anything. Vindication loses its appeal. Curiosity about their inner world fades. This is often when indirect validation arrives. Mutual contacts, social, media glimpses, or belated messages. But by then, it lands flat. Your nervous system has already reorganized. The story has changed. You are no longer waiting for them to see you clearly. You see yourself clearly, and that's enough. Clinically, this divergence is well documented. Survivors who disengage fully from narcissistic dynamics show long-term improvements in mental health, relational satisfaction, and self-trust. Narcissists who avoid treatment show increasing rigidity, loneliness, and dissatisfaction over time. This is not moral judgment, it's pattern recognition. Systems that adapt survive. Systems that refuse feedback fracture. Final truth about absence. Absence works because it removes distortion. When you are present, the narcissist's world bends around you. Your empathy cushions their behavior. Your explanations soften their impact, and your presence delays consequence. When you leave, reality stops negotiating. Their nervous system has to face itself without a buffer. This is not punishment, it is exposure. Systems reveal their strength only when support is removed. What collapses was never stable to begin with. The narcissist will often insist, publicly and privately, that your absence didn't matter. That statement is a defense, not a fact. If it truly didn't matter, it wouldn't need to be said. Neuroscience is blunt here. Emotionally significant attachments leave lasting imprints, especially when they provided regulation. Your absence creates a vacuum that cannot be filled by performance, novelty, or denial. They can distract themselves, but they cannot replace the function you served without doing the inner work they avoid. The more they hide the hurt, the longer it stays active. Avoidance doesn't erase pain, it preserves it. What happens instead is a slow internal narrowing. Emotional range shrinks. Relationships become shallower. Life feels busier but less meaningful. This is not always dramatic or visible, which is why people underestimate it. collapse is often quiet. It shows up as chronic dissatisfaction, irritability, and a sense that nothing ever quite lands. They may appear fine, even successful, but the nervous system keeps the score, and the score reflects loss. Your role in this story ends the moment you stay gone. That's the part most people struggle with. There's a temptation to wait for acknowledgement, apology, or visible regret, but healing does not require their awareness. Stoicism teaches that peace comes from aligning with reality, not from demanding recognition. The reality is this: your absence mattered because your presence mattered. You do not need confirmation from the person who benefited most from your self-abandonment. Over time, your nervous system learns a different rhythm. Calm stops feeling empty and starts feeling safe. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of chase. This is not about becoming cold or closed. It's about becoming internally anchored. When you no longer supply regulation to someone who refuses to build it themselves, both systems move toward their natural outcome. Yours stabilizes, theirs destabilizes. That divergence is not cruelty, it's consequence. If this series helped you name something you felt but couldn't articulate, take a moment now. Subscribe to the channel so this work reaches the people who are still in the fog. And leave a comment with "Staying gone is strength," not for validation, for visibility. These conversations save time, energy, and years of unnecessary self-doubt. Thank you for watching, for staying present through something this deep, and for choosing clarity over chaos. Take care of your nervous system. It's been through enough.